Hey y'all, my name is Miriam and it's time to paint. So grab your paintbrushes and let's get started. We're going to be talking about this painting right here and more specifically how we were able to take it from this to this. Or really from this to this to this. I want to share with you guys some of my favorite ways for bringing my work to life. These are quick and simple methods that I think make a huge impact just in a very short amount of time. You guys are going to see the whole process, so let's dive right in. All right, so right off the bat, we're going to start with this. It's kind of a quick, problematic drawing, but one that has a lot of issues that I think a lot of people stumble on. It's got kind of dead looking skin, muddy colors going on. It's got a lot of symbolic painting in there. We'll talk a little more about that. And although my proportions are fine in it and it has shape, it's really lacking an overall sense of form. So we're going to start with that, correcting the big picture form, the overall form, like the actual head of the shape. We'll get to internal form later on, but that's the first thing I'm going to tackle. We have shape, but we want form. And not only does it not have a really strong sense of form in terms of like value. You know, we often see this black and white sphere, but when I put this into color, as you can see here, my face, if we're thinking of the forms of the face, what I have here in this painting, it doesn't really adhere to the color rules of form. So we're going to talk about that and we're going to tackle that right now. As soon as I get my shapes down, I start thinking about form, the big picture form. I'm ignoring all of the features. Ignore the eyes, ignore the nose, the lips. Don't even think about it at this point. All I want to know is my big picture form there? Does my head look like a sphere, or at least an egg-shaped sphere? This process is important to me and will set up the success for every other step moving forward. I'm really trying to get into a tactile mindset here, trying to get myself to believe that this is not just a flat painting on a flat surface, but rather a three-dimensional object taking up space in all directions. Step 2, and this is honestly probably the easiest, quickest change you can make in your work that will make the greatest impact, and that's softening out your lines. There are no lines on the human face. Even in places where we traditionally think of it, like the eyes around the nose, the nostrils, the edges of the lips, they aren't actually lines. And when we put that there, we tend to fall into this like symbolic drawing land where we draw what we think we see, not what we actually see. So I'm going to show you how much of a difference just softening out those lines makes. Soft lines, softening those transitions tends to indicate form, whereas hard lines tend to indicate edges. So if you are going to put lines into your work, it should be purposeful. It should be for a reason or a stylistic choice. Don't just do it because you think it's supposed to be there. What the biggest thing I always see people, they have hard edges around the eyes and around the lips. Even if a woman is wearing lipstick, it's still going to be, there's going to be a softening there. So check it out. I'll show you the before and after. Now, tell me I'm not crazy, but look at how much of a difference that makes. The top of the nose, the lips, the eyes, just softening those edges. Now you'll notice I blended that out with a little bit of warmth. I did add a little bit of red, a little bit of crap wax rose to my paint as I softened those out. And I'll tell you why in just a second. All right, so here's our little friend, the sphere, the colored sphere. So let's just pick a little mid-tone color, okay? So check out our color picker tool up here. You guys know I love the color picker tool. All right, so if you remember from my previous videos, the further we go to the left on this graph, the less saturated it is. The further we go to the right, the more saturated it is. The higher up, the higher the value, the lower the value. All right, so back to the ball. I have a mid-tone here. It's a nice orangey color. You can see right here. Now watch this dot. Watch that little dot as I move towards the shadows. Ready? All right. 3 things happen. Let's watch it one more time. Yes, it gets darker in value as we go to the shadow side. That makes sense. But two other things happen. It gets more saturated as we turn into our shadows. Do you guys see that? That little dot went from around here down here. It's going closer to the saturated side. And then the third thing that happens, watch this. So remember, we're in this nice orangey color, but as we transition into our shadows, it starts to get a little more red. All right. It adds, there's usually, under most normal lighting conditions, you're going to find more warmth as you turn into your shadows. Now let's go back to where we started real quick and look at those shadows under the chin and even under the nose. They're so desaturated, they're really leaning more towards gray. And that's one of the things that's going to trip you up and get you muddy looking, dead looking skin. All right, let's hop back to the present. We softened out all of our edges, all of those lines. We thought about the big picture form and we added warmth into all of those transitions between shadow and light. Just a little bit, just a little hint right there at the terminator where the light transitions from, or that line where it goes from light to dark. Now, it's time for us to start thinking about internal forms. Just like we thought of the head as a big sphere or an egg-shaped sphere, we can think about all of the other features as simple shapes too. The forehead, the cheeks, the nose, the chin, the neck, the eye sockets. Each one of those can be broken down into its simple shapes, which can be rendered out. This is one of the simplest exercises that you can do for yourself to make a huge impact in your work. Practice your simple shapes. Practice rendering them out and making them look and feel 3D. It'll help you when it comes to portraits. Let's just inventory where we're at real quick. Stage 1, I started to think about big picture form and I softened out all of those lines. That made a huge difference, in my opinion, between stage 0 and stage 1. Stage 2, I'm starting to think about internal forms. We're just starting to get into it, but what I want to point out at this stage is I really haven't thought about details yet. In fact, I've even erased some of the details, like the highlights in the eyes. We're going to add much more believable ones. And that's going to be this next stage. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make when it comes to the eyes is painting the whites of the eyes white and 2, painting them all one solid color. The eye is a sphere. It's a sphere with overlapping shapes on top of it, like the eyelids, which the eyelids also have form. So that's all I'm doing here is I'm thinking of the eye as a sphere, thinking about how the rules of form apply to it, and I'm softening out the edges between the colored part and the whites of the eye. I'm really trying to slow down and think to myself, what's really happening here? And trying to get into that tactile mindset. You'll see I explore a lot. I kind of test out different ideas until I get something that feels right, feels believable. And you guys can see the difference between the left eye and the right eye once I hit that kind of detail stage. You'll see I bounce around a whole lot in my work. I go from area to area and I don't fully flesh out one area before moving on to the next. It's just how my brain works. I kind of think of painting like a Sudoku puzzle. Like once I unlock one part of the puzzle, it might point out errors in other places. And so I just go and fix those. But one of the things that I do want to point out is all of these darks you're going to see me add, like in the eyes and especially once I get into the nostrils. Those are incredibly rich and dark shadows. And when I say rich, they are warm and packed with color. Incredibly packed with color, incredibly dark. The actual colors that I'm mixing up for that are filled with really dark tones like burnt, not just burnt umber, but alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue. It gives the appearance of black, but with a sense of depth. If you want to know more about how I mix my skin tones and exactly what colors I'm using for all of these different areas, I do have a video I recently made just on that. I'll link it below. All right, and here's where we're at after focusing on internal forms and rendering. It's not a perfect portrait, but I think I could end here and it could be fine. these relatively small changes made a really big impact. All right, like I mentioned before, I think this portrait's just fine. I could leave it right here and have a nice, fine portrait. It took us a relatively quick time just to fix a few simple things, and we went from this to this. Now, if you guys are familiar with my work, you know I don't usually leave it quite at that. So we're going to pump up the color, the contrast, and the drama, and we're going to pay special attention to visual weight as we go through it. So let's have some fun. Step one for me in this process is marking in where my darker shadows are going to go and putting in a darker background. That darker background is going to help make my lights stand out even more, just really enhance the drama of the lighting setup. Now, notice I'm being pretty chunky with my colors here because I not only want to provide contrast in terms of value and color, but in texture as well. It provides a nice, fun, visually interesting juxtaposition when we have different textures going on in our painting. So whereas my eyes and the nostrils, those might be much more rendered out, the larger areas like the cheeks, the chin, the forehead, I'm going to leave those a little rougher. I'm also going to be paying a lot more attention to reflected light in this stage. This is one of my favorite areas to play with. It can be really hard to tell the effects of reflected light on a person's face in the moment. Check me out. You might not see reflected light at all on me, but look at my sweater. This red sweater, this reddish sweater is reflecting light back onto here. Not a lot because it's dark, but it still is. Let's imagine instead of this red color here, it was my hand. Look at my neck. Look under my neck. Do you guys see the difference? Look, just by putting my hand there. Look at that reflected light. There's tons of areas on our face where you're going to find reflected light. There's 5 big ones. Here, under the brow bone, under the nose, under the top lip, under the bottom lip, and under the chin, okay? And that's because these are all places where our skin is going to be reflecting back onto the top skin, okay? And your color tends to intensify in those areas. Check that out again, right? I think that is, I do this all the time in my videos because I think it's like the easiest, simplest way to kind of understand it and see how much of an impact reflected light has. And also the color, I should mention, I call that the color multiplier. I don't know, it's just how I think of it. Because whatever color it is, whether it's this yellow notebook, right? It doesn't just tint the color, it multiplies the color. It gets incredibly saturated in those shadows. So if there's one thing that you walk away from this video, it's that your shadows are always going to be saturated. Okay. Almost always. Usually. A lot of times. Okay. All right. And this is where we're going to leave off with it. I like my paintings a little gritty, a little dark, a little in your face. And for me, this works. Now, you could render it out as much or as little as you want. And as long as you're following these big rules of form in terms of color, hue, value, and you're playing with elements of visual weight to really create an interesting dynamic in your portrait, you'll be good. You don't have to worry about being perfect. This is far from a perfect painting, but it's a fun one, and it's one that I enjoyed creating, and that's what I want for you guys, to enjoy the process of creation, to not feel stressed by it or bogged down by it, but rather to feel free by it and to feel empowered, and that like you have the freedom to make all the creative decisions that you want and have fun in the process. All right, I've rambled enough. If you guys have made it this far, thanks for watching, and bye.